This is the e-learning podcast, episode number 70.
Go1, kind of simplest way to think of it is the sort of Spotify for professional learning. So we search all around the world. We partner with incredible best-in-class content creators, Harvard Business Publishing, for example, Oxford University, edX, all the way through to Skillsoft, all the way through to really small niche providers.
Welcome to the e-learning podcast. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from lmspulse.com. My guest for today is Chris Eigeland, co-founder and chief revenue officer at Go1. After another successful round of funding last summer, Go1 became Australia's latest EdTech Unicorn, cementing its vision as the Spotify for professional learning. In this skyrocketing conversation, Chris and I talk about the entrepreneurial journey of Go1 and its founding team, who came from diverse backgrounds that included web design, economics, and international development, and how they discovered a way to deliver incredible value for their customer base. We also talk about the last mile of corporate learning, which is usually the responsibility of trainers and designers, and why success as an edtech company seems to be all about knowing your place. Chris and I also talk about what it takes to build a Spotify-esque library of high-quality content that is relevant for wildly diverse learner needs and stays current. In one word, partnerships. We also discuss stresses and pain points in corporate learning, many of which are created because of rapidly changing priorities and challenges around demonstrating value. Chris underscores why learning your place in this value chain is one factor in creating double-digit growth year after year. We also touch on issues including virtual reality, humanitarian development, credentialing, national and organizational culture, the power of introverts, and why theme parks like Disneyland are incredible illustrations of immersive learning design. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The e-learning podcast is sponsored by the eLearn Success Series, a uniquely valuable set of events that bring together sector experts and thought leaders to offer solutions to the most critical challenges and issues at the intersection of education and technology. Get your free ticket to all 4 sessions at elearnsuccessseries.com. And Open LMS, a company that provides world-class LMS solutions that empower organizations to meet education and workplace learning needs. Learn more by visiting openlms.net.
Hello, Chris. Welcome to the e-learning podcast. How are you today?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Stephen. And thanks for hosting me from Mexico City. It's the first podcast I've been a part of that's been hosted from Mexico. So lovely to be here.
You know what? You have an open invitation. There is plenty of mezcal, tequila, and tacos for everyone. So I think you should come and
I'll
enjoy
definitely take you up on that offer as soon as the borders open again. I understand.
Well, now we all, everyone who listens to this show, they know that, I'm here in Mexico City, but many people may not know where you're sitting. Where do we find you sitting today?
So I'm in Brisbane, Australia. I've been in Australia for most of my life, lived in the US in different places while building out Go1, but primarily because of COVID, we've been stuck here for the last 2 years. So it's been a fairly interesting journey trying to scale a sort of global edtech company from Brisbane, Australia.
Excellent. I've been using this podcast as well as something of a time capsule over the last year and a half here. And so if you wouldn't mind, what is the COVID situation in Brisbane right now? I mean, I know from some other guests that you've been on lockdown and whatnot, but we're recording this on, sort of 2/3 into October 2021. What's it like?
Yeah, so we're both really lucky and really unlucky at the same time. So from a lucky perspective, there's next to zero COVID in Brisbane, in Queensland, the state we're in. I don't think there's any active cases in Queensland at the moment because we've sort of closed our borders, had fairly effective contact tracing and follow up when cases do make it through. But the consequence of that is that we're fairly isolated from the rest of the world. So at the moment, no international travel, no travel even to Sydney, for example, within Australia. And so, from a health perspective, I'm very lucky. All my family is healthy, well. They've had a fairly easy transition through the last 18 months. But from a sort of global perspective, plugging in with our different teams, being able to support the rest of the organization to go through their own transition over this time, it's sort of not been the easiest.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. So I've already teed you up in the introduction and, sort of given some bullet points about what we're going to talk about here, but in your own words, who not only are you, but who is Go1? What is it that you do? Kind of take us through and set the stage.
Yeah, happy to take you on a bit of a journey. So maybe I'll jump to kind of what is Go1 and then the origin story, which is not quite maybe what you'd expect.
I do love the surprise.
So Go1, kind of simplest way to think of it is the sort of Spotify for professional learning. So we search all around the world. We partner with incredible best-in-class content creators, Harvard Business Publishing, for example, Oxford University, edX, all the way through to Skillsoft, all the way through to really small niche providers that may specialize in workplace health and safety training specifically for California or something like that. So we sort of look at the providers globally and build partnerships with them to bring all their content together into a single subscription. And we then offer that to a organization for their employees. And so there's really two pillars to what we do. One is the content model, and then the second is the technology model, where we believe in surfacing that content layer wherever learners are, making it extremely easy for someone to access content. So we invest a lot in our integrations with existing business systems, Slack, Teams, Zoom, existing LMSs, that sort of ecosystem to make it really, really easy to access the right piece of content for you in your learning journey.
Okay, great. So now I want to pull that apart because you had all kinds of great stuff in there, content layer, Spotify for, organizational learning, and I want to pull that apart, but you teased me and then you didn't take me there, which is what's the origin story? You and four other guys were sitting around one day, or you called your other co-founders and what happened?
Yeah, so I'd like to think it was even that linear, but we just kind of fell into it, to be honest, which is we were all running a web development firm together and back in high school, and decided that wasn't really for us anymore. Not exactly the industry that we want to be spending time in. So we all went our different ways and studied different things. So I studied theme park design, and then I studied law following that, which is, of course, a normal transition for someone to make.
Of course.
Andrew studied economics, Ruth studied medicine, and Chris Hood, our technical co-founder, studied computer engineering. And then we all kind of went on our different journeys for a while. My journey involved moving to Haiti in 2011 after the earthquake and building an education not-for-profit there that focused on supply chain restoration in the education sector after a natural disaster. I then ended up working for the UN in a couple of different roles, and with sort of no formal training in education, just became really interested in the education economy and in the future of work, primarily through that experience. Vu was a medical doctor, and he was needing to do the same training over and over again in every one of his medical rotations. So we all had quite different experiences, and then sort of came back together in 2015, and somewhat by coincidence, or maybe even fate, decided that education was a really interesting space and we'd like to tackle it together. And then we formed the business and then went through Y Combinator, the accelerator in 2015.
Mm-hmm. All right. Why, when you think education, I kind of like to think about, and maybe this is the next question. By the way, just, everyone who's been listening to this podcast as well for a while, both my wife and I, the reason why we travel in the world is she's actually works for the United Nations as well. I'd love to unpack that story with you. That's a really interesting one that you went to Haiti there, but maybe another time. But how did you choose corporate learning? How did you choose professional upskilling, development, that kind of thing, rather than so many people would immediately start looking at how do I improve primary school or secondary school or obviously higher education? Like, was there a moment when you said this is the direction we wanted to go, or what was it, like iteration 3.0 or?
Yeah, so we did contemplate and think about the education spectrum, and there are a couple of different things which we thought through when we were deciding which piece of the puzzle to start. So one is where are a lot of other people focusing, and where is there a lot of money already being directed? And the amount of money spent, both from a government and corporate perspective, on someone's education drops off dramatically after 25. It just like drops off a cliff. And primarily that's because of the funding for K-12 and sort of tertiary education. But so that to us illustrated there's a big opportunity. And in that space, that was sort of amplified by the kind of future of work, future of the labor market topics that are in the discourse around the potentially mass reskilling and upskilling of sort of people that will need to occur from certain industries into others over the next decade or so. And then finally, we just had a view that organizations and companies, at least in our view and in my view, have an increasing responsibility over time and will play an increasingly important role in someone's learning journey. And there is an obligation, I believe, on companies to play a role in helping to develop their staff. And you can see that reflected in some of the global trust benchmarking that some of the OECD and those sorts of institutions do, where trust in government institutions is going down, but trust in your employer is going up. I think that's a really interesting trend, and I think speaks to kind of the future of who will be helping power your education. And we see that with some of the trends with Amazon and other players now putting huge amounts of funding behind their sort of employees' learning journey.
I did see, Amazon just would announce that like $1 billion fund or something like that to upskill their staff.
Yeah.
So when we think about where Go1 fits within the niche, I mean, you said you're the Spotify for upskilling or professional development. If I'm either a director of people, director of talent, or a learning and development director, what am I, how do I find you? Like, where do I find you in that journey, and how do I connect you? Those kinds of things. Like what problem are you solving in that equation?
Absolutely. So we primarily solve two problems. One's sort of discovery and one's accessibility. So on the discovery side, from a learner's perspective, it's really hard to find what the right piece of training is for me at any one point in time. Even if you decide you want to learn pivot tables or something, or presentation skills, you could Google presentation skills training and you'll get hundreds of thousands of results and no real indication of what might be the best fit for you. That's from the learner's perspective. And then discovery from an organization's perspective is it's really hard for organizations to figure out what their training obligations are under different legislative regimes and different compliance regimes. And then it's also really time consuming for organizations to match their own talent priorities and talent frameworks to different learning providers and learning content. And so we sort of make that process a lot simpler of helping both the L&D manager and the learner understand what a best next piece of sort of training for them might be. And then on the accessibility side, we simplify all of that procurement. We do all the sort of negotiations behind the scenes. We've built all these partnerships so that an L&D manager or a head of people theoretically just needs to work with Go1, and they can get access to a wide spectrum of content, from compliance to regulated training like accounting, CPD, through to soft skills, professional development, reskilling topics, those sorts of things.
How, and tell me if I'm not going the right direction here, but how close to that sort of that last mile of training, in terms of personalization and exactly what any particular organization would need, can Go1 get to? Are you able to do that as a mashup between different content providers that you have, or is that your sale?
Yeah, so we really kind of value our position as being content provider agnostic. So we just want to provide the best training to that organization and to that person, irrelevant of where it's from. So when we think about learning pathways, maybe insert learning pathway here, maybe going from a kind of junior PHP developer to a senior PHP developer or something like that, or negotiation skills training pathway. Any of those pathways that have been curated by our team or by our system will be a compilation of all the different providers. It'll be, what do we think is the kind of the best piece for that skill and that skill level.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So again, sort of coming back to the person who's the head of L&D or the people manager, am I picking from your custom pathways or the ones that you've already curated, and can I build my own?
You can do either, yes. So we have a bunch of off-the-shelf pathways that have been both manually curated and automatically curated by our team and system. And then also part of the system and our customer success team is around, each organization will have their own business priorities and then their talent priorities that come off that. And if your talent priority is we want to move to a digitally agile workforce, like a lot of organizations had to do very quickly when COVID set in. Then we want to be able to map the library very quickly and map our content ecosystem to those priorities that are somewhat unique to you as an organization.
Take me down the COVID path. I mean, you've been sitting there in Brisbane for the last 18 months or so. I assume that's where the company is headed, headquartered right now as well. What did that pivot your plan at all? Did that accelerate some things, bring other things back? Did you find that you had certain needs come out of the community of, your client base that said, oh, wow, we really should develop this first? Like what was accelerated and what changed?
Yeah, so it's just been such a wild 18 months for, I think, everyone globally. And I remember distinctly being on stage in Salt Lake City, which is where our US team is headquartered, mid-February last year, and presenting our 12-month plan for the organization. And then
total prescience, total vision right there.
Yeah. And then flew back to Australia like a week later, and then the borders closed like a day or so after I got back to Australia. And then that plan was just ripped up, right? And it's honestly been a bit of a journey to go through. I'm sure that a bunch of your other guests have also had their stories about some of the scary moments, some of the really inspirational moments as well through the last period. But the first period was, a reasonably stressful one for the organization. I think L&D can be a discretionary topic, or viewed as a discretionary topic in organizations. And so we weren't really sure, as kind of the macroeconomic situation was going up and down, were customers going to cut L&D budgets and see that as being superfluous? And, we did see for a while some customers dropping off and saying like, oh, actually, no, we can't afford this right now, we're furloughing staff, etc. So that was probably the first 6 to 8 weeks. But once it got through that period, once sort of it stabilized and just this sort of situation calmed down a little bit, people could start planning a little bit further ahead. We were really fortunate that we have a product and an offering that actually could do some good and hopefully help some people during that time. So we kind of pivoted pretty quickly for about a 6-month period last year into how quickly can we increase engagement in the product through people who need it the most. So we partnered with a lot of large enterprises that were furloughing staff, and a lot of large airlines, for example, and offered it for free, and offered the kind of reskilling pathways for free to any furloughed staff, and partnered with a couple of government bodies in sort of Singapore, Malaysia, and Australia for any business that was needing to let go of staff or to furlough staff. They could use any of the Go1 reskilling and upskilling training for free, so that if they were off work for a period of time, they could hopefully use that time to build a new skill base or improve their skill base and come back with increased qualifications. So, we saw a massive spike in engagement with the product through the first 6 to 9 months of COVID. Obviously from a revenue perspective, sort of up and down and moving through, but we really focused on actually how do you just build really in a really high level of engagement to make sure people are getting value at this time, which where the global business community was really unsure of what's happening.
Because I mean, I'm wondering in my mind, I'm threading that out to not its logical conclusion, to a conclusion. How much do you think that you are now not responsible, but how much have you contributed to the great resignation that's happening in North America right now? Where it's hey, I was either furloughed or, my company found out that, we're all really productive and we're going to be remote anyway. And, they had access to resources from Go1. Have you seen any piece like that where people are like, wow, I really discovered there's a whole other universe out there that I didn't have time for before because of your, the offering that you had?
So we certainly have seen a lot more, I would say, discussion on public forums around different training and qualifications. You will see a lot more people posting now on their LinkedIn profiles, for example, around their Go1 training certifications and things like that, than country mile as to where it was sort of 18 months ago. So certainly the level of discussion around different skills that people are learning, relearning, upskilling in has increased dramatically, sort of that we've observed. I can only assume that that has sort of implications for people looking for their new and next role. But I'm a little bit proud that also we've played a role in that as well. Sure. I think if we can help people move to their next role, to their next pay bracket, to maybe take that leap, which, you know, as someone that started a business, taking that leap is actually quite scary, to go out on your own and try something new, and you're taking a few risks there. And if we can even just play a small role in supporting people in that, then I'm pretty proud of our role in that. Yeah.
100%. On that note, one of the things that we've noticed in the higher education sector, you know, obviously it underwent or is undergoing its own sort of existential crisis in terms of value added for students, or what expectations are for tuitions. And we're seeing a lot of degree programs either shift to, or at least include, certifications, right? From like a LinkedIn Learning or a Go1 or something like that. Do you see that as a growth area for your brand?
Yeah, this is a really interesting space that we spent a bit of time thinking about and working in with different universities. Yeah, there is a sort of shift in the higher education space. It was exacerbated by the, you know, lack of mobility for international students recently, and some threats to have existing revenue streams. And so I think the space is really interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that, you know, universities generally maybe adopted one of two approaches. One was a specialist, you know, we're going to be really known for being an amazing medical school, or a generalist, and we're going to be really sort of strong across the board in humanities and social sciences and those sorts of things. And I think there will be a need for universities to kind of make a choice in terms of where they want to position themselves. You know, do they want to be world-class at a narrow band, or do they want to be more of a horizontal player in this space? And if they choose the latter, then you know, what we think about a lot is, how do you help universities build a lifelong learning relationship with their alumni? Because this, you know, standard model is, I mean, I graduated from my university with a law degree. You know, if I was thinking of learning something new, would I go back to my university? Probably not, right? Yeah. But they built that relationship of trust for like that 5-year period when I was doing my law degree, and yet then that kind of drops off a cliff, right? And the engagement goes down. And so what we believe is a massive opportunity for universities is how they move beyond the, you know, the 3, 4, 5 years that you're on campus or partner on campus blended learning, and how does your university build a relationship with you where they can help you find what's best for you in terms of education for the next stage in your career, which may be another university course, or it may be a course from LinkedIn Learning or Skillsoft or something like that. But that position as kind of a lifelong learning partner, we think is, we're very passionate about universities moving towards that model, because we think it will be necessary for kind of their scale to continue.
I love that vision. It takes the university from a moment in time to what I think it used to be, you know, when universities, which was, it was something that communities grew around, right? Like, I mean, this is, you know, Absolutely. You would set up, this is why you have college towns, right? And at least in the United States, or you think of an Oxford or something like that, where entire societies built up around these institutions of discovery. Interesting.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. I think that's where we would love to see the sort of tertiary sector move towards. Yeah.
So it's incredibly easy to talk about all the great stuff, and, you know, you're growing like gangbusters, and I kind of want to touch on that in a second, but I'd love to hear, like, what are the things that your co-founders, you know, your head managers, and what are like the 2 or 3 things that you're grappling with, like in terms of challenges, in terms of hurdles that you want to overcome, or you know, pieces that you know, I don't want to say aren't working right, but just like, this is what we want to do next, or this, you know, we wish this, you know, I'd love to hear about a fail, like, you know, anything like that you could tell us about?
There's so many, honestly. Like, I think, you know, when you're trying to build an organization and scale an organization at the speed in which we are sort of attempting to do so over a long period of time, there will be a million mistakes, and we've made a ton of mistakes. And one of our company values is learn on, and that's not about necessarily going to university or doing those sorts of things. It's about, you know, backing yourself to make a decision, have a go. And then if it doesn't necessarily work out, that's not the end of the world, as long as we learn from it as an organization and kind of keep moving. So in terms of like things which are challenges for us at the moment, and then maybe some individual examples, but in terms of things that are challenges for us at the moment, we are scaling fairly quickly across multiple regions. So originally an Australian company, recently expanded into the US, the UK, Malaysia, and kind of Singapore from a physical footprint perspective. And I think when you kind of grow that quickly, organizational culture becomes really important, and not necessarily from kind of stereotypical perspective of having the values on the wall and those sorts of things, but being able to empower local team members and decision makers to make decisions really quickly that are in line with the kind of direction and values and a vision for the organization. And when you're growing that quickly, it's so easy for a little bits of miscommunication to happen, particularly between cultures, even US culture and Australian culture. Australians are pretty laid back, but also we can be a little bit passive aggressive versus Americans who generally are quite blunt and tell you how it is. And so little pieces like that, actually, when you can't travel and see each other in person, can make building and scaling an organization fairly quick. So we spend quite a bit of time learning about the different cultures in the business, do Go1 around the world links where we dial into different offices and sort of get to know the culture there. And we definitely have not found a solution, but it's just definitely one of the challenges of a fast growing organization. And in terms of like specific failures, I mean, I can think of a ton. In the early days,
what's your favorite early day fail? I just, one of those like ones that we're going to see the playbook along, 10 years from now.
Yeah. So I have a favorite fail, which was early days, which was, when you're trying to get a piece of technology off the ground and you're like 5 people, just trying to scrap it together and make it work. Of course, it's going to error at some stages, but, I would vividly remember this one occasion where we had just implemented sort of the Go1 system for one of our customers. It was a really great customer, high profile logo. We were stoked to get it. And as part of the Go1 system, you have your Go1 profile, which shows your learning history and pathways and those sorts of things. But we had done an implementation with that customer that also pulled across information from their HR system around so then they could disable your access to your Go1 profile when you left the organization, sort of normal HR implementations stuff. But we had an error on the Go1 side with that data sync. And so it changed the field for last day of employment of everyone in the company to be that day to day. So everyone logged into their Go1 profile and their last day of employment was that day. So everyone thought that they were going to be fired that day. And I think I had like 9 missed calls in 10 minutes from that company's head of HR. So
that is absolutely beautiful. That is gorgeous. I love it. Thank you for sharing.
It happens, right? And then you learn, and then you get off the ground. And I think the lesson that I learned from that was around turning challenges and conflict into advocates, because that head of HR, who definitely was not very happy with us and with me at the time, eventually referred us into their new organization and things like that. And so, how you can sort of take those difficult times and turn them around and find some good and sort of joint ground in it is a really important lesson from that.
Absolutely. And it's never that the problem happened. It's what you do about the problem afterwards, right? It's the solution you come up with.
Absolutely.
So let's go to, what most people are probably calling, who've listened thus far are saying, the elephant, but it's really the unicorn that's in the room. I mean, you're one of, at least that I know, 6 unicorns that have come out of Australia at this stage. You kind of newly minted back in July with some really great investments. Tell me about, does it just blow your mind that you're there, first of all, but then how does that change the game? Like, what kind of pressure does that put on you? I've never talked to a co-founder of a unicorn before. So like, just what's it like? I mean, other than holy smokes, you wake up every day and like, wow, this is happening.
Yeah, it does feel, it's a little bit surreal, I guess, because it would be nearly impossible 6 years ago to kind of sit there when you started the company and project forward to kind of this day, because you simultaneously will have wished we scaled faster than we have, and also could never have predicted all the obstacles and challenges and failures that would happen along the road. So nearly impossible to predict. I think from a kind of unicorn status perspective, I think for us, it's far less about the kind of billion-dollar valuation point and more around I think what it denotes around its level of scale. Because we're really excited around the future of professional education. We genuinely think there's going to be so much change here in the next couple of decades. And there will be some players who'll be lucky enough to play a formative role in helping to shape the trajectory of that industry. And for us, I think just the unicorn status is for us is just an indicator that hopefully we can be one of those players that starts to contribute more to the industry in terms of thought leadership and direction. Just as an example, we because we see learning data across so many different content providers and types of content, we would love to help up-level some of the content that's being created based on what we're seeing. Are people now engaging more with videos than with quizzes or whatever? Is, those sorts of questions around how people are learning at the moment. Hopefully we can play, a role in helping to answer some of them, given the kind of the breadth of the data set that we have. And so, that's what I think I'm really excited about. It's less around kind of the specific investors or the valuation, but more about hopefully we're at a level of scale now where we can be having really interesting conversations and helping move the industry as a whole forward.
How does that change like your scaling plan at all, or does it, or was that part of, for those of us who have never been a part of those kind of talks, was that part of the negotiation, to get to this next level? Was, look, here's what our vision is, and here's where we want to go, and we're looking for people to back that? Or is it more of a collaborative effort that comes in later and after you've closed the round, where they're saying, okay, look, we're going to take A, C, and F, but we have ideas, and here's how we're going to create strategic partnerships and those kinds of things as well?
Yeah, it's a mix of both. So I think we have a lot of conviction that this is sort of just the beginning for the organization, and so it still feels like kind of day one for us in terms of all the things we see we want to solve within the business and sort of external to the business. And we were lucky that that investor base shared that belief and kind of looked at what we've done so far and said, yes, this is still the beginning, and that there's still a lot of potential for the organization and the vision that we're driving towards. I think that's a really humbling experience to have someone back the direction that you're going in and back your vision to that degree. And in terms of the process, it really is probably a question of speed. So we have a kind of product vision and a commercial vision for the organization, which is X number of years. And what this sort of capital raise enabled us to do is just kind of bring that forward and compress it to kind of enable us to be exploring, 2 or 3 different product adjacencies simultaneously, rather than doing them one at a time, or building a presence in 2 new markets simultaneously instead of 1. So really for us, it was around, we have kind of conviction in what we think is the right approach, but no doubt it will not be, and we'll need to pivot and pivot and pivot throughout that journey. But then how do you kind of move through that quickly? And that's what sort of this sort of investor ecosystem backed, is how do you sort of move faster to get through that plan. Fantastic.
Just kind of one question on your vision for the future, and maybe, I don't know if this is something that you get together with your leadership and the rest of the people on your leadership team, et cetera, is like, what does the future look like in professional development? Do you see, sort of a minority report kind of future? Do you see augmented reality? Is that 30 years away, or is that 5 years away? Like, or is it a little bit of this, a little bit of that? I don't want to put any words in your mouth.
No, it's a great question. And one which I think we think about a lot and no one has a great answer to yet, which to me is really exciting, because that means that the future is undefined and you can sort of work to sort of navigate through it. I think the topics which we think will be really relevant are the skills topic. So still, it's really hard to understand what someone's level of skill is in a certain area, and then what the right next step is for them. which could be like something quite straightforward, like how good are you at pivot tables? Still, that's kind of hard to understand. Or it could be something more abstract, which is, despite being an Australian, I actually have a maybe unhealthy interest in American politics. So, I would listen to a ton of American politics podcasts and read articles, but, nowhere in my professional learning ecosystem would anyone ever think to ask me a question about American politics. Like, no one would have any idea that is a like deep interest area and sort of deep skill set that I have. And so I think the topic of skills, understanding skills deeply is a really important one for the future. And then there's the kind of the modalities one, which kind of goes to your augmented reality example. But you have people solving different parts of the learning challenge. You have, the universities and the kind of blended degrees. You have people like Go1 who are tackling the short online training modules. You have, the Blinkists who are doing audio, audio learning opportunities. You have an explosion in the podcast ecosystem, etc. And the modalities in which people learn are sort of increasingly diverse. We do think there definitely will be a role to play for VR and AR, and kind of already seeing that increase dramatically, particularly in the compliance sector. And so I think that there needs to be a player that can bring together those modalities, understand them, kind of standardize them, so that me as an learner don't need to go through the process of trying to work out, is this VR piece of training going to help me, or am I better off listening to this podcast? Like those options should be surfaced to you and help given to you to make that decision, because the amount of content that's available is just exploding. And a lot of people learn from YouTube more than they do from their university now. So it's just exploding, and sifting through that is going to be a really important topic for the future.
Chris, you've given us so much of your time. I really appreciate it. One final question that I ask everybody on the show is, what are you most excited about for like maybe the next 6 months, or what would you point out as something that you get jazzed about? It could be a book, it could be a podcast, it could be a shiny new object, a new tech. Maybe there's a new little startup that you're interested in. Like, what are two of the two things that you pay attention to that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, absolutely. So great question. So one of my favorite podcasts is the Acquired podcast. It's a business strategy podcast where they do deep dives into well-known technology companies. And you're talking like, this is a 4 or 5 hour podcast. It's not a small investment of time.
Deep dive,
yeah,
hardcore
it's
history kind of thing.
But I've never like listened to a breakdown that detail around Airbnb strategy and those sorts of things. So that is kind of my regular monthly listen to. That I think is not something that's new in the next 6 months, but that's something which I really look forward to every month. And in terms of the next 6 months, I think my other kind of interest area is theme park design. Circling back to the beginning of the conversation.
Well played, sir.
Mostly because I actually view theme parks as a really interesting environment people learn, right? It's immersive, it's incredibly compelling and engaging. And so I actually view that kind of immersive learning experience as being one that will play an even greater role in the future. And so there's been one thing I'm looking forward to is the borders reopening and me being able to get back and visit some of my friends that work in theme park design, immersive design in the US, and start to think about how we might deploy that a bit more in the educational context and professional education context. I think that's a really, really interesting space that's still extremely experimental.
Fantastic. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to speak again sometime in the future.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Would love that.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the e-learning podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the e-learning success summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.